All right, simmer down. Simmer down. It's not that good. But sorry, my hands are just like so sweaty. I almost dropped this like 3 times coming up here. I had to like pin it against my chest. Yeah, so anyways, now that's out of the way. My name's Sean, and in case you don't know me, I get to be a part of staff here at New Vintage. And usually on Sundays, I'm back in the booth over there, pressing buttons, turning slides, trying our best to make Darren look good. I'm going to be honest with you, sometimes it's really tough, but we try our best. So like I said, I'm a booth person, so being up here is literally my worst nightmare. Like most of the times if we're in the booth, if you never know we exist, that means we succeeded at our job. So this is literally the exact opposite of that for me. So yeah, welcome to week 2 of So Much More. Like Noah talked about and what Darren talked about last week is just a series about how there's so much more to this whole church thing, this God thing, if we let Jesus fully into our story. And if you missed last week, I'd love to just recommend going online, checking it out on our website or YouTube, or hit the podcast. I'd prefer if you checked out the podcast because I edit that one. So subscribe to that, pump up those numbers, make me look good in front of my boss. So like I said, I get to be a part of staff here, which is really awesome because in each staff meeting, we do this thing called Time in the Word, where before we get into business, one of the staff members takes the time to either get into some scripture, a devotional, or some sort of study and shares it with the staff so we can kind of have a solid foundation before we jump into trying to save or solve all of our problems. And so when it came to my turn, though, like I couldn't do it normal. That's one thing you'll learn about me. I'm like kind of a dork when it comes to stuff. So what I did for my time in the Word is I made a PowerPoint presentation. So like some of you guys like playing sports or hiking. Like I do this thing where I make PowerPoints for fun. And every once in a while, I'll get a couple other PowerPoint enthusiasts together, and we'll have a PowerPoint party. Yes, we got one. Woo! I thought I was going to be all alone up here. And so that's honestly like why I'm up here. See, I'm not a pastor. I have no religious training. I don't have any sort of skills that would lend me to being in front of you guys. I'm literally up here because I thought it would be fun to make a PowerPoint for a staff meeting. So but it turns out, I guess, when I did that, I went way too hard, because, and I guess I accidentally wrote a sermon. So, here we are. So before I jump into that, just want to give you guys a little backstory about me and how I grew up, how I got here, that sort of stuff. So I grew up down in Novato, not very far away. I was a 4.0 student, all-star athlete. Sorry, I don't know what to do with my hands still. Like, I did this already, and I'm like, what do I do here? So they're just gonna do things, just play along. So when I was growing up, like, I was that kid that was like really good at everything that like all the other kids hated, like that was me. Like, I was just good at a lot of stuff. And but when I was 16 years old, I got diagnosed with this disease called muscular dystrophy. And for those of you that aren't familiar with it, it's a progressive and incurable genetic disorder that causes my muscles to weaken over time and eventually completely atrophy. So those, like, around St. Patrick's Day, there's those like green shamrocks you can buy at like the grocery store, and you put your name on it and you write it on the wall and the money goes towards somewhere. Like, that goes for me. That's the organization that helps fund research for that. So now, saying that, I really hope I can see a lot more of you guys' names on those little green shamrocks. I'll be looking. But in all seriousness, like, that day was like a really pivotal part in my life, because as the doctor was talking to me about how different my life was going to be moving forward, like, on the inside, as a 16-year-old, like, I felt broken. I felt different, that I was less than. Like, I was literally being told that I was different. But I think the things that really stuck with me was I just had this new, like, internal feeling that I was made wrong, that I was somehow made like a reject, or something that couldn't couldn't really be a part of. And so with that came this like new kind of just long-term feeling of shame that was inside of me. And so as a 16-year-old, like I didn't really have the tools to deal with a lot of these feelings. But one thing I knew for sure is that I wasn't going to tell anybody about them. So I started doing what I saw a lot of my peers doing at the time, was I started drinking. And I have lots of alcoholism all over my family tree, everything. So like I knew that drinking was bad. I knew I shouldn't do it. I knew that there was going to be some repercussions if I did, most likely. But that didn't matter for me. Like I didn't know what I was going to do. So one of the things, though, is that like I'm a really like shy, introvert, like awkward person, like booth person. So when I started drinking, like probably the worst thing that could have happened was I loved it. You know, all of a sudden I was loud, I was funny. People could like, I felt seen, and it was awesome. But honestly, pretty quickly, those laughs, those fun times turned into tears, guilt, shame, regret. Seemed to be causing more problems than I felt like it was solving. And so by the time I was 21 years old, I realized that I wasn't drinking like a lot of the people I knew. Like I had a drinking problem, and in reality, I was an alcoholic. So one thing that's pretty obvious about alcoholism is that it's this disease of failure. Like it's pretty obvious to see like an alcoholic in their mess causes a lot of wreckage. And so, like with that though, there's also this really weird relationship with hope, at least in my experience. So every time I would fail at something, the next day it felt like I would wake up and I had hope that I was gonna do it differently that day. That today was gonna be the day that I got the job. Today was the day that I apologized to her. Today was gonna be the day I got her back. Today was gonna be the day that I quit for good. Today was gonna be the day that I changed. And more often than not, that today became something I was gonna do tomorrow. And that failure just sat with me, so that the next day when I went to tap into that hope that things could be different, there was a little less hope, and in its place, there seemed to be a little more shame. And then as that kind of progressed through my life, the more failures stacked up, it just kind of reached a point where I didn't even really realize it, but that hope was completely extinguished. I was just in this cycle of shame and failure and shame and failure. And it's really hard to put into words how it feels when you reach that point of hopelessness, where it just kind of seems like this is all that there's ever gonna be, that nothing could ever change. And it's hard to really like tap into that, but I'm sure there's a lot of you out there that know exactly what I'm talking about. They're very intimately relate with that place. So one of the things too that goes with that kind of hopelessness is this: it's really hard to have purpose when there's no hope, because you can't really run towards or go towards something or chase after something when deep down inside you know you're either gonna fail at it or it's never gonna happen. So that's where I was at 21 years old. And the next couple of years of my life, I just proceeded to run it into the ground, alienated a lot of my family and friends, and I finally got the boot from my 4-year-long relationship. I had this opportunity though, where I ended up back on my parents' doorstep with just some garbage bags that had everything I had accumulated up to that point in my life. And like, not the big ones, I'm talking like the little kitchen ones, like the left like everything with like a weird Febreze smell. Like that's where I landed at 24 years old. All my friends were going off to start careers and start families, and here I am, landing back at home, my tail between my legs. And so my parents said I could stay with them under one condition, and that was that I got sober. So that started my journey of recovery. What didn't start very well, kind of stopped, stuttered, got going, but eventually I was introduced to this thing called a power greater than myself. It's kind of a lingo for a God of my understanding that they use in meetings and rehabs, recovery centers, all that sort of stuff. But the general idea of it is that I get to pick and choose and make a God that works for me. And see, I loved that idea because, like, I think I'm the smartest dude in the world. So obviously, my God is going to be the best God. Um, but the only problem with that is that when the time comes, I can't, like, a God founded in me is only going to last as far as my strength. So when the storm comes and I need to tap into that God for strength, or to find joy when I'm in despair, or to just have some sort of hope poured into me, there was nothing. So that storm finally came and that God got washed aside, and I just remember complaining to one of my friends about how I felt that God had abandoned me, and that my God wasn't big enough to handle what I was going through. And so she hit me with this question. It's a really simple question, but it blew my mind. She said, okay, so your God's not big enough. Why don't you go and get a bigger God? And I was like, whoa, okay. That sounds easy. So I was like, biggest God, and I'm just kidding. But it was, the God of the universe, of love and hope and all this sort of stuff, like, was pointing towards Jesus. And so in my head, I had this idea that, like, I saw a church in my brain when she asked me that question. And one of the cool things was at this time as well, my mom was already a born-again Christian. I was not a fan of that. Here's a funny story. So when I was like, I needed some rent money, because that's how it rolled. Be like, Mom, I need some rent money. And she'd be like, oh, have you given that to Jesus? And I'm like, Jesus ain't paying my rent, Mom. And she's like, God bless you. And I'm like, but anyways, with that though, with this question of why don't I get a bigger God, I had seen the work that God had done through my mom. I had seen that there was a tangible evidence in my life that change was possible, that I had hoped that maybe that could work for me. I mean, and did you catch that? I was hopeless, and just one quick encounter with someone that knew Jesus had started to fill me up with hope. And so I did what I thought I should do. I went and I checked out a church in the area that I was living at the time, and I walked in the doors, and everything was cool, and then they started playing music, and I just started ugly crying. I couldn't keep it together. All the words on the screens, all the songs they were playing, it was like they were written for me. Feeling so lost and so broken and so full of shame, and here was a God of hope. So I cried through all the worship. I cried through all the announcements. Some lady, kind of scooted over and threw a couple tissues at me. But yeah, and then the pastor, he went up and gave his message, and at the end of it, he invited everyone there to stand up if they wanted to accept an invitation to start a relationship with Jesus Christ. And I found myself standing up. And I still think he saw me crying during announcements and was like, oh, we got one. We got one. But yeah, in all seriousness, what was really cool is I started going to church. I started jumping in some groups. And then 6 months into it, this happened. And yeah. So it's really cool getting to see Seamus's story, because there's so many of those stories in every church everywhere. And people ask me how was it getting baptized in the ocean? And just so you know, this was out at Point Reyes, so it was really cold, and it was really salty. That was my experience of getting baptized. But yeah, so anyways, I got involved a little bit, but I never really fully dove in. I never committed to anything. People would be like, oh, do this, do that. And I'm like, oh, maybe, I don't know. Because in all reality, I was terrified at what I had just signed up for. I didn't really know what it meant to follow Jesus. I didn't really know what it meant to give my life to him. And so I did what I almost always do, is I got scared and I ran away. I slowly backslid out of that church, and then COVID happened, and it gave me this wonderful opportunity to just be like, see, it's God's will that I don't go to church anymore. But yeah, in all honesty, I hopped right back into my old way of doing things. I took control over my life, and within a few years, I was back to doing the same stuff I always did. And So roughly about 2 years ago, I showed up here on the back of another failed relationship, just full of fear that I was never going to get this God thing. I was never going to get it. So see, I would look around and I would see everyone seem to have it together. Like they were just these pillars of faith that I could never get to, I felt. But that's one thing I've learned since I've been around here for the last 2 years, is that we all feel that way. We all see somebody else and be like, man, I wish I could be like that guy. No joke, a week ago, somebody was like, man, how do we get such strong faith like you, Sean? And I'm like, what? What? I tricked him good. Because deep inside, I still have all those same insecurities. I still think just because I'm not fully or don't feel all in, that I'm not all in. So that presentation that I did for staff, it was just a collection of characters that I related to in the Bible, and more specifically, how I related to them during my walk. So if you guys want to see that presentation? Okay. Oh, man. I can't believe I'm doing this again. So the first character I wanted to talk about is this of the rich young ruler. And there he is. See, I got a laser. You can't be a PowerPoint party presenter and not have one of these. But yeah, so the story of the rich young ruler is Jesus and his disciples, they're traveling, and some guy comes up to them, and he asks them a couple questions about what he needs to do to inherit eternal life, or how to join this Jesus movement. How can he get into heaven? And he asks a bunch of questions, and he says, I've followed all the rules, I've obeyed all the commandments, what am I lacking? And Jesus hits him with this. So he says, one thing you lack, go and sell everything you have and give to the poor, and you'll have treasure in heaven. Then come follow me. At this, the man's face fell. He went away sad because he had great wealth. See, he's so close to Jesus, yet he's asked to change his life. He's asked to give up something. He's asked to sacrifice just a little, to go all in, and he fails. Man, is that my story. You heard all those times where I feel like I want this, yet when the time comes, I'm like, nah. I think I'm going to keep trying it my way. And my way, I walk away sad every time. And so the next character is Peter. And for those familiar with Peter, the fisherman, so Peter's the ultimate Bible screw-up. So right away, he's my boy. So I'm just it's not very hard to find a Peter failure in the Bible. But one of the ones I really relate to is when he's asked by Jesus to walk on water. And in this one, Jesus and the disciples have literally just done a miracle. And they're traveling away, and the guys want to go sleep in the boat. Jesus goes up to the mountain to pray. And then when he comes back down, the boat's kind of drifted off to shore. So he walks on the water towards the boat, and Peter sees him, and he freaks out. He's like, are you a ghost? And Jesus says, no. And then Peter's like, prove it. And what he really says, he says, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water. Come, he says. Then Peter gets down out of the boat, walks on the water, and he comes towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, Lord, save me. Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, he said, why did you doubt? So for this, man, now I'm starting to follow Jesus. I've said yes to a few things. Walked through some fears, given, okay, Jesus, you can have my relationships. But then the second something doesn't go my way, I go, oh, never mind, I'm going to take that one back. And that's the sentence I hear every time I feel like that. It's, man, Sean, you of little faith, why did you doubt? And man, that one sucks to have on repeat in the brain. And so the next story I want to talk about is this parable of the prodigal son. Jesus is talking to some Pharisees, which were religious rulers at the time, about just illustrating some stories about this new way of living that he's talking about. And one of the things he talks about is this parable where there's two sons. One of them takes his father's inheritance, runs away, squanders all of it. And then he has to come back with his tail between his legs, begging for mercy. And I mean, I relate to that. I mean, you just heard my story. But the more that I decide to follow Jesus, the more I put my trust in him. In fact, the more I become the older brother. I don't know why, but I picture him as a farmer, so just go with it. But so he stays at home. He does what's asked of him. And so when the brother comes back and the father welcomes him in open arms and throws this giant party for him, he's a little pissed off, you know? So much so that he refuses to go and join the party. So the dad comes out after him, and this is where it picks up. His dad comes and invites him in the party, and he answers his father, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. You never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when the son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you killed a fattened calf for him." Like, ooh, that self-righteousness. Like, see, for me, like, once I start to pick up how to do stuff, what it means to be a part of this church, for some reason, I all of a sudden decide, not only is this the right way to do it, but now I'm better than everybody else at this. And it's just like, wow, where did that come from? Like, here I was struggling, wanting to fit in, and the second I fit in, I think, man, this is the way to do it. Everything else is wrong. And I always love how Darren, when he's up here, he talks about being in traffic or in cars and people cutting him off and how he gets angry. Like, see, I don't get angry about any of that stuff. Like, if I'm honest, like if someone comes along and cuts me off, I'm like, cool, go, yeah, dude, do what you gotta do. I'm like, good job, do better, but whatever. But what really bothers me in the car in traffic is when there's people, when I'm waiting my turn in line, and there's the carpool lane going next to me, and nobody's actually carpooling in the carpool lane, and I'm taking my time, and I'm just like, man, if you guys just break all the rules, there would just be no consequence. Oh, it must be nice. But then the second I break a rule on the road, I'm like, well, it's different, Like, I needed to go, or it's just different. Like, that's what I'm talking about here. So going through these three characters, these three people in the Bible, like, as I was originally making this presentation, I was having a lot of fun with Photoshop, as you can tell. And I got really bummed out, I'm not gonna lie. Like, I was having this fun, yet every character that I was relating to what they lacked. I was relating to their failures. I was relating to their self-righteousness. And I'm just like, man, like, here I am again. And so one of the cool things about New Vintage is that there's a lot of groups, there's a lot of connection, there's a lot of people to get involved with. And so one of those guys in the groups, he's a little older than me by like a lot. And he always says something that sticks in my head. Is he says he loves reading the Bible because that's where he gets to meet God. That's where he gets to meet God. And so this thought popped into my head. Like, here's my story. I'm relating to it a lot. Where's God in this? And so I took those stories, those people, and I opened up my Bible and I reread them, not looking for where I can find me, where I can find God. And this really blew my mind. So if we go back to the story of the rich young ruler, where I see lacking, where I see walks away sad, if we just go one verse before this, look at this. Jesus looked at him and he loved him. Before he even walks away, before he even fails, Jesus has already wrapped him up in love. If we go to Peter, where he's falling, Peter of little faith, the second that he doubts, that he fails, look at this. Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You have little faith? No, Jesus is right there answering that save me. And then next up, when we go into the older brother, when here he is just telling about what his dad should do, what his father should do, what God should do, how he should behave. At the end of it all, here's what he says. He says, "My son," the father said, "you are always with me, and everything I have is yours." All this stuff that he wanted, that he was telling him how it should go, what it should be, he's saying, come on, man. You already have all this. I'm already here for you. And so isn't that cool? So when I ask that question, where's God in all this? He's all over all of those stories. And what's even cooler is that not only is he just there showing his love, in each one, he says to the young ruler, sell your stuff, follow me. This is that invitation to follow him. With Peter, in the moment, in the exact moment, pulls him out of this boat. Here, you're with me. And with the son, the older son, the dad goes out to the field to say, hey, man, come back into the party. Yeah, I know, it's hard. Come on in, come with me. And so in this, each one of them was invited. They each messed up, but all of them were loved anyway. And isn't that cool that we have a God that's for us, that wants us to know him? Yeah, perfect. That he goes before us, he's there with us, and he'll come after us. Like, that is a God. Thanks, Jeff, for that little distraction. But also, so look how different those stories turned out when I looked for where God was. So then I decided, okay, that whole story that I told you about myself, like, that is my view of my story. But here's the thing, there's so much more to your story than you can see. So when I play that same lens, when I just look for where's God in my story, everything changes. In fact, there's so much more. Boom, title, boom, nailed it. Series title. Anyways, so when I take my story and I put it through, where's God in this? Like, everything changes. So 2 years into being here at a part of New Vintage, I'm still tempted to see myself as that same guy that walked through the doors, completely broken, alone, full of failure, trying to understand this God thing. I don't think I'm good enough, that because I'm wavering and I still doubt and I still have questions, that I'm not fully all in. But if I really look at it, like, look at how God is using me right now, right? Like, that's pretty cool. And then when I'm still tempted to, like, see that guy from 5 years ago that was just a complete mess, feeling completely alone with a God that had abandoned me, the Holy Spirit was working in me and breaking me down in that church to prop me up and get me going to where I'm supposed to be going. See, I still want to get into that pit of despair and hopelessness that sometimes I just get really frustrated with the fact that I'm an alcoholic, that it kind of set my life back for so many years. But God was already ahead of that. He was already paving the way with my recovery, where I get the chance to meet hundreds and hundreds of people who are in that same pit, looking for some hope. And I get to reach my hand down there and be like, hey man, we got this. Let's do this. Like, what a gift, what an absolute gift that I don't get to see when I'm looking through my lens. And so last of all, I still turn to those feelings of that 16-year-old kid who was told that life isn't going to be the same going forward, that I'm broken, that shame. But see, now I get to be confident that I'm a child of God. I'm made in his image. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. I'm his masterpiece. Like, the difference between there and there, when I let God into my story, wow, it's absolutely incredible. So my hope for you today, as you connect with this place, whatever your story is just to emphasize that God doesn't just see you as a failure. He sees your talent, he sees your dreams, he sees your effort, he sees you getting up, your potential and your possibilities. You see, we have a God that's already been before you. He's there with you in the middle of every misstep you make, and will chase after you no matter how many times you fail. So I want to challenge you to look at your story and try to find where is God in it? Where's he been moving? What's he been up to? Because I bet when you do, you're going to see so much more. Thank you, New Vintage. It's been awesome.
Crushed it, brother. Look at this. Sean Greenhall, ladies and gentlemen, so good. I love Sean, and I love his story. I love that God takes what the enemy meant for evil and he turns it into good. I love stories like Sean where it'd be really easy for him to just 5 years ago go, you know what, I'm done, God. I'm going to continue this path. I don't need you. I'm done. It would have been really easy for him to do that, but it wouldn't have been fulfilling for him. He wouldn't have been able to give this message to us today. And so I think a lot of our stories are very similar to Sean, where we're broken down and we just think there's no way out, and we think there's no way to keep going. I'm at a dead-end job. I can't get into this school. I'm having marital issues. Whatever the case may be, know that God has a plan for you, and know that God has a way out for you. Give it to God. We can't do it on our own. I'm so grateful that you're all here, and I just want to pray for us, and then we'll head out of here today. So, dear Jesus, thank you for this day. Thank you for everybody that is in this building. Thank you for turning broken things into beauty, God. Thank you for turning all of our brokenness into your plan. And I just pray that we would continue to surrender to you so that we can just trust your process and trust in you. God, I pray that any sense of fear, anxiety, or stress that we all may feel may be replaced with your love and your compassion, God. I pray that any evil spirit is replaced by your love, and we all know that your light trumps any darkness that we may face. God, I'm grateful for everybody here, and we just pray that as we leave this building today, we would have a pep in our step, and we would be able to shine your light onto others as Sean did to us today. Thank you in Jesus' name, amen. Thank you, guys. See you next Sunday.